Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with your ideal Ives symphony cycles. Yes, Charles Ives. Who would have even thought a few years ago that we would be able to do this one? But we can, and we're going to do it two ways, because the Ives symphonies are really so extraordinary and such a varied bunch that they're worth considering both as integral cycles with one conductor for the most part, and individually. And that's how we're going to do them. We're going to do them two ways. It really fascinates me, quite frankly, that there's so much available now. It's amazing. There are about 7 complete cycles at this point, and I assume that number will be growing because it just had a recent edition. I happen not much to care for it, but it's a recent edition that is due to mail with the Los Angeles Philharmonic. But let's sort of start at the beginning and consider these pieces individually, just so that you know what you're in for. The first symphony is a student work. It was sort of Ives' graduation thesis. He wrote it under the watchful eye of his teacher at Yale, Horatio Parker, who famously said to him, "Why can't you make up your mind what key the first subject is in?" Which is really rather amusing. It's a foreshadowing of the Ives to come. It's actually a very, very attractive work, I think. I really do. I love it. The opening theme of the first movement is da 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 ba da 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 da. It has a wonderful sort of American colonial kind of sound to it. It's very hard to describe otherwise. Although the finale is a genuine sort of romantic symphony that sounds a bit like the finale of maybe Bruckner's first or Nielsen's first or Dvorak's first. Pick a first, any first. This is clearly a first. It really raises the issue of what Ives might have known when he wrote it. The second symphony is the most famous of them all. He starts to quote American folk tunes. Listening to the Ives symphonies, it's very much similar to looking at paintings. The paintings by what's his name? Who did all the line things. I'll think of his name. Wait a second. Pete Mondrian, that's his name. Mondrian. If you look at his paintings, you see that they start as sort of normal portraiture, and then lines start to interfere, and the shapes and figures start to get broken up, and then finally there's nothing left but the lines. Well, Ives symphonies evolve in a similar way. You start with kind of normal melodies and forms. Then in the second symphony, these disruptive elements come in. And of course, that final raspberry of a chord is famous after an apotheosis featuring the tune Columbia, the Gem of the Ocean, on the trombones. Then the third symphony was an orchestration of some organ preludes that he wrote originally. And it seems to be slightly regressive, but it really isn't, because the counterpoint is extremely wayward, and it's a meditative and very lovely work. It's subtitled The Camp Meeting, and it's scored for chamber orchestra. Then the fourth, all hell breaks loose, which is amazing. With this second and fourth movements are absolutely startling and incredible. The first movement is just a prelude, and the third movement is a fugue that was originally extracted from his first string quartet, which is completely tonal. And it's just, and on the one hand, it's a hodgepodge, but on the other hand, it's this magnificent sort of transcendental masterpiece, an amazing, amazing piece of music. And so there is a progression from one to the other, and cycles that manage to encompass them all, not surprisingly, vary in their success. So why don't we talk about some of these cycles quickly? Now, there were a couple mixed cycles. The first one, and I'm not going to address them as such because one of them I will, but the other one doesn't really exist anymore. That was the one that was on Sony, which had Ormandy's first, Bernstein's second and third, and the Stakovsky fourth. It's actually a very, very good cycle, but I haven't seen it around on CD in a long time. And all of those performances were available separately, so I'm going to list them with the separate ones. The other sort of mixed cycle is this one, the Decca cycle. This contains Zubin Mehta doing numbers 1 and 2. Now, the 2 is quite good. Number 1 is cut. Oh, why did they do that? That really sort of rules this one out as an integral entity, because number 3, which is Mariner in the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields, is fabulous. And number 4 is Doch Nadia in Cleveland, which is probably my vote for the best number 4 of all of them. It's extraordinarily fine. So those are well worth having. And if you can disregard the terrible things they do to the first symphony, you might want to consider this and just forget about the first, because all the other performances are really, really good. As far as complete cycles by a single conductor, the complete cycles by a single conductor began with Harold Farberman on Vanguard. That complete cycle never made it to CD, as far as I can tell. Symphonies numbers 3 and 4 were released, but I never saw 1 and 2. I could be wrong. It could be I just missed them. But in my recollection, I haven't seen 1 and 2, and it's all disappeared anyway. By now, it would be nice to hear that again, but we don't have to worry about that or pay attention to it. The other integral is the one I mentioned, was Dudamel and the Los Angeles Philharmonic, which was released digitally and as a physical product sometime later. Now, this is very beautifully played, absolutely beautifully played and beautifully recorded, but I don't like the interpretations. And the funny thing is, we're far enough along in our understanding of Ives and his musical syntax that we can talk about idiomatic style and interpretation. You know, back in the day, it was impossible. We were just happy to have a chance to hear the music at all. And, you know, beggars couldn't be choosers. And this is on Deutsche Grammophon. It's sort of a deluxe project. It really is. It's a major release. But, gee, Dudamel doesn't know what he's doing with Ives, especially in the Fourth Symphony, which is hasty and just completely lacks that the mystical element, shall we say. It's all just sort of in your face, up front, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, let's get it over with. And that disturbs me. That disturbs me terribly. Even in the First Symphony, which is a basic romantic symphony, it needs more care and attention than Dudamel seems willing to give. No faulting the Los Angeles players, no faulting the DG engineers. It's all in the hands of the conductor. And I don't think he's a very convincing Ivesian. That's me, and that's Dudamel. So I don't recommend that cycle. Sorry. I mean, those of you who are Ives fans may want to hear it anyway. It's less expensive just to download it. That's what I did when I wrote the review on classicstoday.com, which you can check out and see over there if you're interested. I mean, give it a shot. See what you think of individual performances. I was not convinced. I was absolutely not convinced. Now, there are, let's see, 1, 2, 3 other complete Ives cycles that are worth talking about, which I think is just fascinating. I'm so happy that these things exist. One of them is the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra under Andrew Davis. Now, I wouldn't have thought much of this originally. I mean, of its chances, it's quite good. It's really very, very good. It's well recorded, it's well played, it's well interpreted. It gets the job done. I enjoyed listening to these performances for the most part very much. They're on individual CDs, and there is another CD, a third CD with the Holidays Symphony, which is nice to know. Now, Davis uses an interesting edition of the Fourth Symphony, one that, you know, I think makes it conductable by one conductor more or less, and cleans up a lot of the sort of chaotic textures and picks a melodic line and kind of goes with it. Some people may not like that approach. They may not like the idea that you should try and bring order to some of the chaos in the second movement especially. I think it's very convincing. I really do, and I recommend that you hear it. It's worth hearing. It really is. Next, there is Michael Tilson Thomas. This was his Sony cycle. It was divided between the Concertgebouw Orchestra in Symphonies numbers 2 and 3, the Chicago Symphony in Symphonies numbers 1 and 4, and you also get the Holiday Symphony. And here, I believe, yes, it's here, because it's 3 discs here, and some other short pieces, you know, the Unanswered Question, Central Park in the Dark. He did orchestral set number 2. fabulously here, absolutely fabulously. And then there's a fourth disc that has all sorts of, it's got 3 places in New England and all kinds of interesting shorter works, including some of the hymn tunes that Ives used that went into the Fourth Symphony. It's a very complete and comprehensive Ives cycle. It has some wonderful performances. These sonics, which were early digital, are a little bit clogged in the Concertgebouw second, and I think maybe the fourth in Chicago could use a little bit more clarity, but Tilson Thomas is a terrific Ivesian. He always was. He always will be. His performances are really fine, and so it's wonderful to have these. This just came out. This is, as I'm speaking, this is January 2021 now, and so this is a terrific budget box to have, and I just recommend that everybody get it just to have all the stuff that's in it. Tilson Thomas has re-recorded since in San Francisco the Holiday Symphony and Symphonies 3 and 4. So, and they're, all these performances are excellent. He's a terrific Ives conductor. I mean, he just gets it, absolutely gets it. So that's fine. Finally, however, here's the however choice. My selection for a complete cycle is Lytton and the Dallas Symphony Orchestra on Hyperion. Comes on 2 discs. It's not put together collection, but boy, these are hot performances. I think they have the edge over Tilson Thomas simply because of the engineering. The sonics are superior. Lytton, again, is a completely idiomatic Ives conductor. He gets it. He uses the critical edition of the First Symphony, which has some extra percussion. Yay! At the end of the finale. I don't know if Ives really wrote that extra percussion. I was looking at the sort of critical commentary on that piece. It turns out that Ives scratched on a piece of paper somewhere, stick some band percussion in the end in this rhythm. Chung, 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 chung. That was it. And so James Sinclair stuck it in for cymbals, bass drum, and snare drum. But what the hell, it's Ives. It sounds absolutely fine, and it's wonderful to have. So my recommendation for complete cycles is to try and find Lytton in Dallas on Hyperion. It really is wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. Now, let's talk about an ideal Ives cycle using performances that come from none of the complete cycles that I just mentioned. Because we are now spoiled for riches when it comes to Mr. Ives, and it's possible to do it. I mean, I just can't believe it. I think I've mentioned this before. Charles Ives came from Danbury, which is where my father came from, Danbury, Connecticut. And where my grandfather had the auto parts store on Main Street in downtown Danbury, where Charles Ives shopped. I just think it's fascinating. And he also went to my high school, Hopkins Grammar in New Haven. And we used to have, and then to Yale, of course. And, there was a lot of Ives in my childhood. And, the Yale Symphony Orchestra would come once in a while and play Ives festivals for us, at the high school. It was really wonderful to have that little bit of Americana, growing up. It was really a fixture in our lives, especially if you were growing up in Connecticut. And I remember, Milford, my hometown, is on the borders. The border between Milford and the next town over, Stratford, is the Housatonic River, as in the Housatonic at Stockbridge, from 3 places in New England. It's just great to know that music. And I remember I had friends from Europe coming, and we were going to visit Mom in Milford, and we went over the Housatonic River, and they got very excited. It's like, that's the Housatonic. I said, yeah, that's the Housatonic. It goes all the way up to Massachusetts, and Stockbridge, where the Housatonic at Stockbridge was first conceived by Ives, is in Massachusetts, and it's right next to Tanglewood, where the Boston Symphony's summer home is. So when you are, heading to Tanglewood up Route 7 from Connecticut, you go through Stockbridge. It's great being able to, I think, to grow up and experience all of this stuff with a composer who was so unconventional, wonderfully unconventional. That was kind of my musical childhood with Charles Ives, and so I've always had his a great deal of affection for his music, for personal as well as musical reasons. So anyway, let's talk about my ideal Ives cycle. Now, this, as always, is not necessarily, the best or even my favorite, but it has no weak links. These are all splendid performances with different conductors for every single symphony, conductors who do not appear in the complete cycles that I've mentioned, except for the Sony cycle that I mentioned, which was never issued in a box, I don't think, on CD, and was always assembled from heterogeneous elements. I feel that I can use those heterogeneous elements in coming up with my ideal performances. So, Symphony Number 1, you really should hear the critical edition with the extra percussion, and you can get a wonderful performance with James Sinclair, the guy who did the critical edition on Naxos. His whole Ives series is absolutely first rate. I'm so sad that they didn't do a fourth. There's no fourth symphony in this series yet. Maybe it will come. I don't know. So I can't talk about it in terms of the complete symphony editions. They did all the others. This also gets the Emerson Concerto for piano, which was reconstructed from something. I am actually, as I feel about things like Mahler 10 and Bruckner 9s, I'm not into these completions of things. I think they're far too conjectural. And my God, with Ives, I mean, what does conjectural even mean? You just basically do anything you want or make any screechy noise you want, and voila, call it Ives. Who's going to know? So, and the Emerson Concerto is a completely sort of atonal phantasmagoria. So I can't really say how much Ives is in here or not. But the performance of the First Symphony, and this is with the National Symphony Orchestra of Ireland, RTE, and it's a beautiful performance, though. And you get the Emerson Concerto. So this is a terrific performance of Symphony Number 1. Symphony Number 2, I'm going with Bernstein. Yes, his second one, not his first one. The first one is the one that was in the old Sony set. That one has very pale sonics. It's an exciting performance. It's the one that Ives himself sort of, heard when he had never heard the symphony. It has historical significance, but this is in every way better, in every way. And it's got wonderful short works attached to it. It's got the Gong on the Hook and Ladder, and Tone Roads Number 1, and the hymn Largo Cantabile, Halloween, Central Park in the Dark, and the Unanswered Question. So it's a wonderful, wonderful coupling. Now, Bernstein's Number 2 is an incredibly powerful interpretation. It's not the critical edition, by the way, but I don't care. It's all there, and the critical edition, to me, it changes some things with tempo and maybe an exposition repeat in the second movement. It's not something that I think is important enough to worry about. The controversy over Bernstein's Ives 2 was always on that last dissonant raspberry of a chord. Dun, 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 dun. Ives wrote it short. Dun, 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 dun. Like that. Bernstein holds on to it and really lets it sneeze, And some people have made a big fuss over that. Fussing. I have no idea why they're fussing over the way he holds the last chord. I mean, there have been so many other things done to major works by other composers that are so much more extreme than Bernstein's decision to give a little extra emphasis to that last chord. I mean, you could say the same thing, and most people don't, about the last chord of Brahms' Fourth Symphony, which is very short. It's bum, bum. That's it. That's it. That's all it is. And lots of conductors hang on to it for 2 or 3 times its length, and no one has anything to say about it. So why are we making a fuss about the last chord of Ives 2? What matters far more than the last chord is everything that happens before. And in that respect, Bernstein is really very hard to beat, especially in the big climax when Columbia, the Gem of the Ocean, comes soaring in. In this performance, it's a wonderful muddle. A muddle in the sense that, he allows you to hear all the strands in the texture. You hear the trumpets go da-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da. You hear all of the polyphony going through it. It's quite wonderful. Unlike Tilson Thomas, for example, where in this concertgebouw recording, where Columbia, the gem of the ocean, kind of gets buried in the welter of sound. Here, you can hear it, but you also get the welter. And I'm going for the welter. So if you like a welter and you want your Ives to have lots of welter, then by all means, get Bernstein DG in number 2. Number 3, I'm going for selecton. This is in his American Music box. If you can't find the individual disc anymore, it comes with a fantastic 3 places in New England and a whole bunch of short pieces. You get March number 3 based on Old Kentucky Home. You get the unanswered question in Central Park in the Dark, because you always get them whether you want them or not. And the fugue in 4 keys on The Shining Shore is absolutely first class. 100% first class. Doesn't get any better. In fact, this performance of the third and the Mariner are really, really the great ones, I think, so far. Although no one really does the third badly. It's a very easy symphony to do well. You just keep it moving and flowing, and it kind of plays itself. And have a nice approach to the offstage chimes at the very end. That's always very attractive. There's also a very good, a semi-cycle actually from the Seattle Symphony under Ludovic Morlot, and that's worth, or Merlot as we call him, you know. Now that's worth considering too, if you can find that. Those are readily available. 3 and 4 are superb. 2 is coupled with other stuff, and they never got around to 1, unfortunately. You know, again, you would have had a nice cycle there. It would have been nice to have, but they didn't do it all. And they did the holiday symphonies too, very, very well. So that's something I just want to mention it in passing. It just goes to show how much Ives is out there and how he's become a genuine international composer. It's not just American stuff for Americans, you know, or lousy orchestras. I mean, he's being done by major orchestras and major international conductors. Even Dudamel in Los Angeles, much as I don't really care for it, I mean, it's wonderful that they're doing it, and that conductors of all stripes feel that he's within their purview. That's why I'm so happy about Andrew Davis and Melbourne. I mean, what a wonderful thing to do for Mr. Ives. To have him go to Australia, I'll bet he would be shocked. Absolutely shocked at all the attention. Finally, we come to Symphony number 4. And, you know, it's just such an easy recommendation. Stakovsky. The world premiere performance of the work, the world premiere recording of the work, and boy, has it held up well. It has held up so well. Maybe because Stakovsky was one of those conductors, he just didn't stint. You know, he did everything 100%. Even when it was demented, he usually did it 100%. Remember that 60 Minutes interview he gave, you know, to Mike Wallace? And he said that. He said, I always give 100%. He was sort of muttering as he usually did. Do you always give 100%? Mike Wallace said, no, sometimes I only give 75%. And Stakovsky gets up and sort of walks away on him. I have no time for anyone who doesn't give 100%. You know, he's very eccentric. But you hear it in this fourth. It sounds terrific still. You hear more of the music in certain respects than in any other performance. No one does the last climax in the second movement of this better. Nobody. I mean, the fugue in the third movement is gorgeous, with the organ beautifully touched in, and the finale is absolute perfect Stakovsky material, because even though a lot of it is a, you know, hubbub of cacophony with its various independent parts moving around through it, when that chorus comes in at the end wordlessly, you know, doing the hymn, you know, with the, you know, percussion sort of glittering around it, the percussion marching underneath it, there's a cathartic release that all great performances have to do, and this one still does it fabulously. Dohnányi does it wonderfully too. That's a great performance. That's probably overall my favorite fourth, maybe the best fourth in objective terms. Technically, I saw them do it live. It was amazing, but can't go wrong here. Cannot go wrong with Stakovsky in the fourth. So that is my ideal Ives cycle in toto, by individual conductors, and by separate conductors, one to each of the 4 symphonies. I did not include the holiday symphonies in this survey as a separate entity because as I said, you can get them. I mean, you can get them in the box with Tilson Thomas. They're included in the Andrew Davis series, and they're all very well done. And there are some individual ones. I mean, if you want to have a separate holiday symphony, one that is not part of any of the others that I've discussed, you could go with Zinman on Decca. That's a very good holiday symphony, and it's also Ormandy on RCA. Those are good too. I mean, we have choice. That's my point. It is so exciting to say that we have choice, and choices of superb quality, so that we can actually make comparisons and pick and choose and really get a sense of what makes this music idiomatic, effective, and successful, even in its most insane and wacky moments. Isn't that cool? I mean, isn't that just great? And all of us here, we've participated in that process and continue to participate. So keep on listening, folks. Thank you for joining me. Take care.